Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Downs with the Sleep Balance Academy. I'm also on the faculty of the AIR Institute, which is the Portland Protocol, taught by such leaders as Dr. Jeffrey Skinner, Joseph Selk, and Terry Coddington, and also Mark Abramson, among other faculty members that were at the Las Vegas show last week, and were presenting some of the most forward-thinking advanced knowledge on airway management and also sleep apnea control through the dental profession. So I'm going to talk about three subjects. One will be the offers that we have and the support that we can give the AIR Institute through Sleep Balance Academy. The main subject is on nitric oxide and nasal airway health and how we can improve that and how we manage that in conjunction with our patients who are suffering from sleep disorders. And the last one, which I completed as a afterthought, was the effects of nitric oxide and sleep apnea on sexual dysfunction, including the loss of libido and erectile dysfunction. So let's go ahead and talk about that. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm going to start the meeting with this one. I did this quick slide presentation the night before my main lecture in nitric oxide physiology, because it was mentioned to me by a podcaster earlier in the week that the effects of disrupted sleep on the sexual health of our patients is not being addressed very well, not even by our institutions that teach dental sleep medicine, and also in the sleep medicine in general. So I started this slide out, and I'm entitling it ED, erectile dysfunction, and nitric oxide, and how they're related to sleep disorders. Just a little disclosure, I'm Richard Downs, and I have a financial interest in some of the things that I talk about in all three of these lectures, these mini lectures that I'll be giving you. I'm the owner and one of the owners of OraCare Products and one of the founders of OraCare Products. And we do sell a mouth rinse, which I will discuss the effects of nitric oxide by mouth rinses in general, and also relate it to my company. I also have a company called USA Guard, in which we make nasal rinses and nasal gels for the management of nasal airway patency. And so those are products that I do have a financial interest in. Of course, I'm the founder of Sleep Balance Academy, and the faculty members include Dr. Joseph Selk and Dr. Skinner, and also other members of my community who help tremendously in creating that educational platform for people to learn sleep medicine online with our company. And then I have a dental chiropractic collaborative and also the Dr. Sleep Show, which is an actual television program that I do weekly for the lay public, interviewing pillars of sleep medicine on my show. As I said before, I am the founder of USA Guard, which is a nasal products company, and so I do have that to disclose to you. Okay. I'm also a representative of a company called In Hand Health, and In Hand Health is not a company owned by me, but I do highly endorse them. In Hand Health is a company that has a software management program that we will probably be using in the future for remote patient monitoring and reimbursement programs through that by insurance companies. And so I'm going to present the versatility of that later on. I'm also a rep for INAP. Dr. Joseph Selk and I arranged a meeting with them early in the introduction of this product. We promoted them heavily to get them started in America. And we really believe that INAP is a tremendous boon to the health of people who suffer from obstructive sleep apnea. I'm also a ResMed rep, and I represent also probably the main person in the country who is referred to by the Body Metrics company in selling circle rings to dentists. So I have a fairly exclusive relationship with ResMed, who sells the Night Owl and also the circle ring, which is produced and sold by Body Metrics. And you can see I also have a show called the Dr. Sleep Show, and that show is on Monday night. It's a new channel from the Champions TV, and it also appears on Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, and Android's apps. Okay. Nitric oxide and the reduction of and its reduction and how it's related to obstructive sleep apnea. As we know, many medications can make sleep apnea worse. They include barbiturates, benzodiazepines, some beta blockers, opioids, and sildenafil. And you might be surprised by that one because men are using that one to help improve erectile dysfunction, but it can actually make your sleep apnea worse. And if the sleep apnea is worse, it can make ED worse. So there's a cyclic problem there, a vicious cycle that needs to be addressed. Also, there's a lowering, additions of testosterone can be disruptive to sleep. Drugs that cause you to gain weight can also do this, make sleep apnea worse. Okay, both the quantity and quality of sleep are affected by testosterone levels. Patients with OSA have less REM sleep, reduced deep sleep time, increased nighttime wakenings, sleep fragmentation, reduced sleep efficiency, which leads to a low testosterone level. Now, I've copied these slides. They're just cut and paste slides, and I told you I'd go through this quickly because I don't see any questions on the screening forms that I've seen lately, including my own, that includes a discussion of a patient checking off whether they have any disorders with sexual function. And it is something I will show you in a little bit why it's important to be on that form, because it's highly correlated with obstructive sleep apnea. And this is another quote that I got from my research online. Parasympathetic fibers extend from the sacral complex of the spinal nerves, supplying erectile tissues. Upon stimulation, these nerves cause a release of nitric oxide from the endothelial tissue in the cells and the trabecular arteries that eventually causes tumescence. This comes from Bancroft, 2005. And he hypothesized that the noradrenergic neurons of the locus ceruleus in the brain are perpetually inhibitory to the penile erection, and that the cessation of their discharge that occurs during REM sleep, I should say REM, I'm sorry about that, may allow testosterone-related excitatory actions to manifest as nocturnal penile tumescence. So what he's saying here is that he believes that the brain, this locus in the brain, is actually suppressing erections, and that when that is interrupted during REM sleep, it allows the testosterone related excitatory actions to manifest as nocturnal penile tumescence. Sue in 2003 recognized that in particular the spinal regulation of cervical cord is critical to nocturnal erectile activity. Now, what Bancroft is saying is not necessarily a proven hypothesis, okay? It's just a hypothesis. But anyway, we do know that these two authors locate much of the sexual dysfunction to the brain. Erections develop through sexual stimulation, which is accompanied by an increase in intracellular cyclic guanosine monophosphate. Remember cyclic guanosine monophosphate, because we're going to talk about that in the general lecture on nitric oxide in a little while here. So this increase in intracellular cyclic guanosine monophosphate with neurotransmitters and relaxing factors from the cavernous nerve terminal and endothelial cells in the penis, resulting in several-fold increase in the blood flow of the penis and the penile tunica. I had to say this, albuginia occludes venous outflow. Okay, so there's not only an increase in the blood flow, but there's an actual valve that is stimulated to kind of keep it that way. Let me get this out of the way here. The leading theory is that during hypoxic events during the sleep are an independent risk factor associated with ED. A cascade of vascular inflammatory events is activated by intermittent hypoxia events, including downregulation of circulating nitric oxide, vascular endothelial dysfunction, and the release of oxygen radicals. In the physiology of the erection, nitric oxide is a crucial transmitter. A decrease in the circulating nitric oxide levels may also contribute to diminishing nocturnal penile tumescence, and endothelin is a potent vasoconstrictor. So what they're saying here is that this decrease in nitric oxide levels is related to hypoxic events when you're struggling to breathe during obstructive sleep apnea. High sympathetic activities have been considered potential causes of ED as well in patients with OSA. When you're suffocating during sleep, you revert from the parasympathetic sleep that you need to a sympathetic activity, which is a highly excitatory state of being where you're releasing a lot of stress hormones, and also this interferes and causes some of the ED that patients are suffering from. Also, depression is a common comorbidity in men with ED and may result in ED by reducing sexual desire and or inhibiting parasympathetic nerve activities. In other words, they're saying that depression is the cause of ED, and one of the reasons that it does it physically is because it's inhibiting parasympathetic nerve activity, as again, opposite what you want. In other words, it's promoting sympathetic activity rather than parasympathetic activity. Serum testosterone levels of male patients with OSA is low. So this is just another correlation that they see. And the AHI of oxygen saturation index is negatively correlated with testosterone levels. Recently, new studies showed that the penis may also be an organ with a circadian rhythm of its own, and that disruption of the sleep-awake cycle can impair the erectile function. So that's an interesting observation that we have actually circadian rhythms in other organs in our body, not just this particular organ. A diminished or absent of erection is thought to result from a decrease in REM sleep in patients with OSA. And so again, they're relating the activity of the brain affecting these decreases. So we work together with the AIR Institute in making sure that you get this information. We would like to see this on your screening forms. Okay. The erectile dysfunction was attributed to an increase in NADPH oxidase activity in rat model of sleep apnea. So that's a chemical that's related to the Krebs cycle and the energy production in your bodies in all cells. There was one interesting thing found that exosome treatment significantly improved erectile function, and the LTIH exposure induced ED rats and corpus cavernosus smooth muscle cells. So we're seeing a lot of umbilical cord derived healing factors that are now being marketed by a number of companies, and they have contain a number of exosomes, which are healing factors that we need to have in our bodies, and they decrease over time as we get older. As a matter of fact, a lot of dentists and physicians are drawing blood from people, spinning it down, and doing a PRF treatment. Trouble is, when you get to be age a certain older age, there's a lot less healing factors and stem cells in your blood, and therefore the effect of these PRFs are much lower for older people than they are for younger people who have much more healing factors. So this quick discussion about ED and obstructive sleep apnea was intended to lead into the next one, which we'll talk about, and that is the nitric oxide physiology. And this is the main program that I usually do, but I presented this because I'd like to see you add this to your forms. As a matter of fact, there's a study in Germany in which 91.3% of patients with obstructive sleep apnea also had erectile dysfunction. The correlation is so strong that it ought to be one of the things that you ask on your screening forms. Thank you. Okay, I'm back. Now we're going to get into the main presentation on nitric oxide and nasal health. This lecture I've lectured twice on it, once in New York, and the latest one was in Las Vegas. I've added some new material to this presentation. And again, I'm going to talk to you about nitrogen, the nitrogen cycle, nitric oxide cycle, and the enterosalivary system. And these considerations are important to me because I was asked this question in Dallas, and I need to have it. It seems to be becoming a concern. Most of you have heard that mouth rinses decrease nitric oxide. What I would like to show you is that this is not necessarily true, and it's especially important to know when it is and when it is not true. So let's go into the presentation, and I'm going to do another disclosure here. Okay, the disclosure is that I am co-founder of Oral Care Products Company, which is a mouth rinse company. And so I have a financial interest in some of the things that I discuss in this lecture. And then I've added some stuff related to nitric oxide production. We talked a little bit about nitric oxide or obstructive sleep apnea interfering with erectile dysfunction in men, but you should also know that one of the latest studies I read was that it decreases obstructive sleep apnea, reduces the libido in women by at least 25%. So it affects both male and female patients. Now, in doing my research on this, I ran across some important things about human loneliness. And there's just 2 slides on this. So I want you to just kind of listen to this, because we got to screen our patients with not just checkoff forms, but we need to chat with them a little bit. And sometimes patients will say things that aren't necessarily true. They have a perception. In other words, if you ask a patient if they're snoring, they'll say no. But if you ask their spouse, they may say, "Of course, they snore so bad I have to leave the room." So it's interfering. And one of my own assistants in my office, her husband snored for so long that when I finally treated her husband, the next day she came back and told me that she was dreaming for the first time in many, many years, maybe 10 years. And the dreams were very vivid. As a matter of fact, she had a dream debt to make up. And that happens on people when they finally get into the dream cycle that has been deprived of them for so many years. There's a debt that has to be recovered. So human loneliness. This is the number 1 slide I want you to read, and that is this: that loneliness studies show that there is a 3-fold increase in the likelihood of subject catching the cold after exposure to viruses. There is an increase in the severity and recovery time. There is a 4-fold increase in mucus secretions as well. Therefore, you could say, it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek statement, that a lonely, disagreeable person are snotty people. Actually, this information comes from an Alameda County study in California. Mucus congestion restricts nitric oxide nasal benefits. There is an increase in norepinephrine, shutting down the immune system too. This comes from Angus Chen, 2015. When you cannot breathe through your nose, if your nose is not open, then the nitric oxide produced in the nose cannot be breathed into your lungs for the benefits that you need. And there's some supporting studies here. Loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death. Loneliness and social isolation linked to serious health conditions. This comes from government publications, and this is the internet address for that right there. Okay. Here's another loneliness statement that we should look at. Maria Bosia, in writing in the Well-Lived Life about loneliness, the health effects of loneliness, how isolation impacts physical and mental health. This was posted on May 13th, 2021. And this is some of the information that we got from that. Loneliness studies also show that those who have a very poor lifestyle and health habits like smoking, poor eating, exercise, actually are healthier if they are in good human relationships, and more healthy than those who have good eating routines and good health habits. Those who smoke can actually cut chances of death in half when they switch from a lonely to a good social relationships. So loneliness is very detrimental to your health. Therefore, you could say a person in good relationships and eats ice cream will be healthier than the lonely person who eats kale. Just I gave that kind of a funny statement just to kind of help it stay in your mind. So this comes from the Alameda County study, as I mentioned before, loneliness and risk of mortality, a longitudinal investigation in the Alameda County, California, March 2010. And here are the references to that. Now, loneliness also increases your problems with sleep and getting proper sleep. So let's go into the nitrogen cycle, and then that'll lead us into the nitric oxide cycle in our bodies. I was going to have you listen to a video here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to kind of talk to you about what's on the video. I'll show you the diagram from this YouTube demonstration of nitrogen. Nitrogen is an inert gas but is essential for life. And how does nature overcome that? In other words, what they're saying is nitrogen is not able to be absorbed directly from the air by humans or any animal or any plant, period. The way they overcome that is through bacteria. Bacteria is essential. And this is why we're going to talk about the nitric oxide cycle, excuse me. So let's go back here. I'm just got a little bit off here a little bit. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Nitrogen makes up about 78% of our atmosphere. And you can see that that is the largest gas portion of our atmosphere. The remaining 21% is oxygen, and then there's about 1% other gases like argon and carbon dioxide. Okay. So here's the nitrogen cycle in a nutshell. You have atmospheric nitrogen on the top. Is N2 is the atomic symbol for that, or chemical symbol. And as you move into the to the left here, you'll see that it goes down into the ground, and it's nitrogen fixation that takes place. And the soil and the bacteria do the fixing, okay? And they fix it into a product called ammonium. And it's also brought into by the bacteria that are living in legume roots like alfalfa. The ammonium then, as it is processed by other bacteria called nutrification. And nutrification, you can remember it by the symbol NO2. NO2 is a nitrite. So if you were to think about nitritification, you just need to take the other T off of there. It's nitrification. Okay. Now these nitrifying bacteria also continue to work on the ammonium and then turn it into NO3. So it's oxidized from nitrite to a nitrate, and NO3 is a nitrate. When it becomes a nitrate, it then is able to be brought into plants through the root system, and the roots are now using that nitrogen in that kind of a form to make their chlorophyll and the nucleic acids that they need. And then the animals eat the plants, and we eat other plants and animals ourselves to get our nitrogen. So all this comes through this particular cycle. Now you see a mini cycle in the middle where the plants die, and when they decompose, they again form nitrogen. Ammonium, and then they go through a small cycle there in the middle, back to nitrites and the nitrates. And then when they get to a certain point, certain bacteria will also convert the nitrates back into nitrogen, N2, and that's nitrifying bacteria, and they go back into the atmosphere. This is the cycle of nitrogen. Now let's go and talk about another nitrogen cycle in our bodies. We are part of the animal cycle of the nitrogen cycle, but we also have a nitrogen cycle of our own. And here I'll make some shocking statements before we get started on this. I know you've all heard the idea that mouth rinses are going to destroy the bacteria in your mouth and therefore lower nitric oxide levels in our body and raise our blood pressure. And I'm going to talk to you about that specifically. Also, how do we increase nitrogen in our bodies through nasal hygiene? And we're going to talk about that too. It's part of the problem that we're not teaching this as well as we should be in our dental sleep apnea training programs. Okay. Here's the shocking statements I'll maintain in this presentation. 1, rinsing with antimicrobial mouth rinse can lower your blood pressure and balance your oral microbiome. Okay, let that sink in. So that's the opposite of what you've heard. Snoring helps infuse the lungs with nitric oxide, which is good for you. You've always heard that snoring is bad for you. Well, there might be one instance where the snoring might be good for you by increasing nitric oxide levels, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Bad breath lowers blood pressure. Did you ever hear that before? I'm actually quite an expert in bad breath. That's what I started the oral care company with, is a bad breath reducing mouth rinse, which uses chlorine dioxide to actually convert bad breath gases into harmless salts. There aren't very many rinses that will actually do that, convert a product a bad smelling product into an inert product. And one of the reasons it helps heal wounds is because it's able to do that. No other mouth rinse can do that. Hot dogs and bacon can be good for you. Now, I know I don't want you to get some of these statements are extreme, but you understand. I want to show you where nitrates in foods can be good for you. And I just brought that up to kind of give you something to stimulate your mind. Green leafy vegetables in your diet will supply you with enough nitrates to exceed the WHO, that's World Health Organization, recommended levels by 550%. So there is a mismatch in these science readings that we will do. And one of them is that the WHO recommends a low level of nitrates because of the worrying about cancer production in our bodies. Yet green leafy vegetables, and if you eat them the way they should be eaten, plenty of them, and they're good for you, will actually increase your nitrate levels by 550%. And that is very good for you. And there are papers on that I will show you that actually prove that. So the mismatch between these two scientific communities is a little bit puzzling. Antioxidant supplements in the diet consistently show an increase in cancer rates and worsening of cancer conditions. So you've always been told that antioxidants are good for you. Take note, okay? Now, we've got a lot of bandwagon marketing now around nitric oxide. All kinds of supplements appearing on the marketplace, and I don't think they're necessarily bad either. All of them have a little different approach, but many of them contain similar things. You'll notice on this one, this is a friend of mine in Arizona who's taking this. There is a smattering of vitamin C and some magnesium in this, but you'll also notice if you read down further that there is sodium nitrite in this bottle, NO2. And I think that is okay. We can take NO2 and actually help increase our nitric oxide levels in our body. And by the way, NO2 has benefits of its own without being converted to nitric oxide. I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, here's another supplementation that I was given by Dr. Rachel Carver in her lecture, her excellent lecture on nitric oxide that she did online a few months ago. And so I have a couple of slides from her presentation that I want to give her credit for. If you get a chance to listen to her lecture, I highly recommend you do so. But she showed us the Berkeley Life Professional nitric oxide source and also the Neo 40. And they're both good sources of nitric oxide supplementation. How they work, they quickly increase their body's nitric oxide from makers of super beets. This is the Neo 40. Neo 40 is one of the makers of super beets, and so beet powders are good for you to get nitric oxide. It's the #1 pharmacist recommended brand. It's clinically tested and patented, and it has exclusive patents licensed at the University of Texas Health Science Center. So they promote themselves, and these are some of the things they have in there, including methylated tetrahydrofolate, and also I believe this one contains a nitrite. Okay. And I like this one too because it's the only one that dissolves under the tongue, so you can actually absorb some of it under the tongue, and I think that's a good thing. Now, the Burley Life has sodium nitrate in it rather than sodium nitrite, and it also kind of unique because it has a nitric oxide test strip that you can use to test the nitrogen coming from your nose. Neo 40 has sodium nitrite in it, as I said before. So Burley has the nitrate, and the other one has the nitrite. These supplements may be good as we age because our mitochondria, we lose mitochondria that make the nitric oxide. Vitamin C may help with nitrosamines and nitrosamides. What I mean by nitrosamines is those are the cancer-causing products that you find in some of the hot dogs and other types of nitrated or nitrated meat. And so we want to make sure that if there are, they can be treated with vitamin C to kind of reduce those negative side effects. Nitrates are inherently present in all plant materials, especially vegetables and forage crops and beer. The interest in nitrate consumption is due to the subsequent conversion of nitrates to nitrites, which are of greater concern in the formation of nitrosyl compounds. These are the cancer-causing compounds. And that's why the WHO made that recommendation. The endogenous conversion of nitrite into nitrite is a specific source The endogenous conversion of nitrate to nitrite is a significant source of exposure to nitrites, okay? However, nitrate intake in conjunction with vitamin C and possibly E may inhibit the endogenous nitrosamine formation. So what they're saying here is that you can take some vitamin C when you do these types of foods and probably attenuate some of the nitrosamines and nitrosamides that might develop. So the current thoughts on mouth rinse effects on the tongue commensal bacteria is what we're going to address now. We are interested in producing nitric oxide from the nose, but we're also interested in not suppressing nitric oxide production in our body if we're going to damage it in any way with a mouth rinse. And so we're going to talk to some of the subjects listed on this. Let's introduce this. Most key opinion leaders' comments on the subject have fallen into what I would call the scorched earth evangelist category. I'm disappointed with some of the key opinion leaders saying this, including some very respected ones. So this is how it affected me when I heard this. It was unexpected. First of all, I would expect KOLs to be more discerning and not just repeating attention-grabbing sound bites. Why would we care? Good oral hygiene saves lives. We've known this for hundreds of years. Well, are we going to abandon hundreds of years of good oral hygiene based upon some bandwagon concept that people are touting without talking about the nuances of the studies that we're going to examine in a minute? Let's take a cool-headed look at these facts, okay? What do I mean by scorched earth? You hear statements like, I don't believe in killing all the bacteria. Yeah, well, neither do I. The balance of the microbiome should be preserved. Well, I agree with that too. I don't believe in the scorched earth approach to therapy. I've heard people say that. Well, I don't know what they mean by scorched earth. Well, I think it's something that needs to be defined. Antimicrobial rinses raise your blood pressure, all of them. That's what most people are saying right now. If something is popular and sounds like common sense, people will repeat it without inspection. So Dr. Oz, I watched his show, maybe a year or two ago, and he brought up that mouth rinses raise blood pressure by an average of 3 points on his show. He just repeated the study from a recently published article from Houston, and I'll show you that article. Most people are quoting that article right now, and I'll go through that study and show you what the way it ought to be interpreted, in my opinion. This is an online dentist who's making a very blanket statement, and this is what I've been hearing most from around the country. Do not use mouthwash, okay? It's just a blanket statement. And then they say things like this. And by the way, this is Dr. Kevin Stock. He states that nitric oxide comes from bacteria in the sinuses, one of the statements he makes, and the mouth. The nitric oxide comes from the bacteria in the sinuses and the mouth. He stated that 25% of our body's nitric oxide comes from the mouth. He stated that all mouth rinses are a problem. All three statements are incorrect, and I'm going to explain that to you in a minute. nitric oxide in the paranasal sinuses. This is a study by Lundberg, and it's on the it's a PubMed article, and it says that these are the way the nitric oxide is produced. Inducible nitric oxide and cyclic GMP is produced by nitric oxide done by the cilia continuously. This is the cilia in the nose. Nitric oxide is an aerocrine in this situation. What I mean by aerocrine is this. You've heard of paracrine hormones. These are hormones that are produced and then affect a portion of the body that's not necessarily right next to the place where it's produced. An aerocrine is as opposed to is like an exocrine. In other words, when you produce the nitric oxide in the nose, it is breathed into the lungs, and when it goes into the lungs, it dilates the lung alveoli and also increases the uptake of nitric oxide into the bloodstream and dilates the vessels, the blood vessels in the lungs to absorb oxygen better. So it's acting in a site far away from where it was produced. That's why it's called an aerocrine. There are an equal number of fringe supplement sellers like Stephen Grundy, MD, who have latched on to this latest mouth rinse study in Texas, and now a popular bandwagon citation article evangelizing the dangers of mouth rinses destroying nitric oxide production, calling it bad oral hygiene practice, and instead touting pseudoscience like pulling or oil pulling. Now, this particular quote comes from Grapeo.com on YouTube, and it says that Stephen Grundy, it's the title of the article, Stephen Grundy, Quacks Selling Harmful Supplements, and it's on the newsworthy article with Grapeo. Okay, you can look it up yourself. So an aerocrine, nitric oxide. It's an airborne nitric oxide inflammatory marker and aerocrine messenger in man. That comes from that article, and also another PubMed article. Okay, sinus oxide synthase is made I'm going ahead and I exited full screen here so that you can see the writing on these slides instead of them being covered up by some of the screen margins here. So here's what I was saying. Cyanous nitric oxide synthase is identical or very closely related to human inducible nitric oxide synthase. However, the regulation of cyanous nitric oxide synthase expression seems to differ fundamentally from what was earlier described as inducible nitric oxide synthase. Cyanous nitric oxide seems to be unique, is what I'm saying here. Inducible nitric oxide synthase is made in the mitochondria. And it's one of the main ways that tissues make nitric oxide. So we're going to discuss that in a minute. But I want you to understand that the nitric oxide that comes from the nose is somewhat unique. Nitric oxide concentrations in the nasal airways and the sinuses may help to protect against airborne infectious agents. Inhaled endogenous nitric oxide derived from the upper airways may be involved in the regulation of pulmonary function in man. Nitric oxide will reach the lower airways of the lungs with the inspired air and at levels that are especially high during nasal breathing. Nasal breathing is really important if you're going to be treating people with obstructive sleep apnea and airway issues in general. Their health is involved here. The involvement of autogenous nitric oxide in the regulation of pulmonary function may represent a novel physiological principle, namely that of an enzymatically produced airborne messenger. A continuous production of nitric oxide takes place in the acidic stomach through the chemical reduction of nitrite present in swallowed saliva. This is the first evidence of a non-enzymatic nitric oxide production in humans. So here's another source of nitric oxide that is produced in the stomach by our stomach acid by its action on nitrites. And I'll talk to you about nitrites in a minute. A large production of nitric oxide takes place in the paranasal sinus from a constitutively expressed steroid-resistant inducible-like is an important word, nitric oxide synthase in the epithelial cells. It's kind of a unique nitric oxide source. So I'm going to ask this question. Do all antimicrobial rinses raise blood pressure? Was the most recent study unflawed that I'm talking about? Do other studies confirm these conclusions? Are we going to abandon the wisdom of general hygiene learned over hundreds of years? I believe the answer to all these questions is no. So here's the revelations that I came to the conclusion of as I started studying this subject. What you will realize at the end of this lecture, what? Almost all studies show only chlorhexidine increased blood pressure. 2, it is nuanced. It's even more subtle than that. Even chlorhexidine lowered the blood pressure in certain hygiene practices. No one knows why. Okay, it's very important. And here are the sources of nitric oxide. I've alluded to one, the inducible nitric oxide, but there are others. And so these are the ones that are mainly described in the literature. The intrinsic sources are the endothelial nitric oxide synthase. They come from vascular endothelium. It's called ENOS. Then you have the neuronal nitric oxide synthase from the neural tissue, and then the inducible nitric oxide synthase, which comes from the mitochondria that I talked about earlier. This happens in the tissue, and they convert nitrites to nitric oxide. And then I will call this the extrinsic system, and we're going to talk about the entosalivary system, in which the bacteria in your mouth help convert nitrates to nitrites. And then these nitrites are swallowed and go into the small intestine, and the nitrites are converted to nitric oxide. Well, they're also converted in the stomach, as I just mentioned earlier, by the stomach acids. So here's the nitric oxide pathways in a little more of a charted form. Blood nitrites are signaling molecules produced by oxidation of nitric oxide and reduction of nitrates. You have to understand that these chemicals go back and forth. In other words, you see nitrite in the middle, the nitrites. You can either, the nitrites can be oxidized back into NO3. I see that both arrows are pointing in the left, but they should be pointing in both directions. And nitrites can be reduced to nitric oxide. And again, nitric oxide can be oxidized to nitrites and then back to nitrates. They go in both directions. And you can see that the vitamin C is what we would use to help prevent nitrosamines. Reduction can, and this reducing of nitrites can relax the vessels in the hypoxic condition. So you have EONS, NOS, and INOS. These enzymes convert L-arginine into nitric oxide. Most of these are produced from L-arginine, by the way. Now, here's the mast cell. And the mast cell, I told you, is where the inducible nitric oxide is made. Nitric oxide is made by macrophages, which are a type of white blood cell. I said mast cell, I meant macrophage, which are a type of white blood cell in our immune system. The nitric oxide kills bacteria, inhibits the replication of viruses. Macrophages and nitric oxide action are part of our innate immune system. This is a rapid, general, and non-specific response that is the same for any pathogen. It kills them, whether it be fungi, inactivation of viruses, or bacteria. This slide comes from Dr. Rachel Carver again, and it's from the Renew Health slide that she cited. It came from Renew Health. You can see on one side the macrophage 1. It's a classical production of the nitric oxide. You can see that there's a reduction that takes place here, and you can see that citrulline is used, and the T1 cellular response is what is being active here, and you can see that the inducible nitric oxide is made on that side, but you can also see the cytokines at the bottom that are produced on the inflammatory side of this classical M1 production. Okay, so you can see the inducible nitric oxide is at the top of that slide, and it's made from arginine. Now on the right side, you'll see an anti-inflammatory mechanism, an M2 reaction, and then again, they're using ornithine and urea, and you get a Th2 response over here. A Th2 response is our learned immune behavior. In other words, and it is a way that we make nitric oxide over on this side of the, excuse me, this is the anti-inflammatory side of the macrophage, okay? And you can see on the bottom there, interleukin-10, the TGF, and all the different types of anti-inflammatory cytokines that are being made on the right side. Nitric oxide is synthesized in endothelial cells and macrophages. So let's take a look here. You can see that on the diagram on the left, the muscle cells are producing nitric oxide, and it goes into the blood vessels. Also, those blood vessel smooth muscle cells are actually relaxed, so that the blood vessel itself expands or opens up, and that allows the better flow of blood in the system. You can see that this is a Hey Siri, do mast cells produce nitric oxide? By the way, both mast cells and macrophages produce nitric oxide. So, but as you can see, there are two types of nitric oxide synthase produced here: the endothelial cell expressed nitric oxide, and also the inducible nitric oxide, which is produced in the macrophage and activated by cytokines, tumor necrosing factor alpha and the interferon gamma. But again, both mast cells and macrophages will produce nitric oxide. Here's another chemical that is produced and that is pretty important in the membrane protection. It's called sialin. It's found in protein foods. It is crucial membrane protein, essential as a nitrate co-transporter. So it is found in all tissues, and especially parotid gland, brain, kidney, liver, pancreas, thyroid, and submandibular glands. This is important in the cycle that we're going to talk about, the intrasalivary system, because nitrates are brought from the blood back into the mouth, and you're going to need sialin for that transport. Okay, here's a study that I want to cite for you that is important for us to look at. The food sources of nitrates and nitrites are the physiological context for potential health benefits. And that's the one I mentioned to you earlier about the green leafy foods having enough nitrates in it to exceed the World Health Organization recommendations by 550%. That comes from this article. But I also want you to see this, and it'll help you understand how much of our nitric oxide comes from food, okay? From the conversion of the nitrates in food. So let's do that. So approximately 25% of the green leafy vegetables or any other type of food that is nitrate, of this ingested nitrate is secreted in saliva. So what you do is you chew the food, 25% of the nitrates come back to the mouth through the bloodstream from that food, 25% of it. It is secreted into the saliva, where some 20% or around 5 to 8% of the nitrate intake is converted to nitrite by commensal bacteria on the tongue. Then the nitrite is absorbed in the intestines and converted to nitric oxide. So I want you to understand this. What the doctor said that was wrong, that I cited with you earlier, he said that 25% of our nitric oxide comes from food. It's not true. It's 5 to 8%. What he is trying to quote is actually a 25% ingested nitrate is secreted in saliva, where some 20% of that is then converted into the nitrite, NO2. And get that? NO2. Then the NO2 is converted by the bacteria in the gut and in the stomach to nitric oxide. So here again, sources of the nitric oxide from L-arginine by enzymes is E-NOS is 70%, the N-NOS, and then the I-NOS. I don't have the percentages on those two, but you can assume that those are going to be a lot smaller than the endothelial-derived nitric oxide synthase. Nitrates are converted in tissues to nitric oxide, as we showed you in that macrophage diagram. By the way, in this article, they say that the endogenous production of nitric oxide is also adaptable. It increases when you have hypoxia. So when you're suffocating in sleep and this hypoxia is produced, okay, you're actually increasing the production of nitric oxide. Not a good way to do it, but I'm just telling you that it is adaptable. And we have reserves of nitric oxide in our tissues ready to go. There's two words I want you to remember: pleiotropism and redundancy. These principles exist in all human physiology systems. What pleiotropism stands for is that a single molecule, like a cytokine, can have multiple effects in different tissues. In one place, a specific cytokine, could produce an inflammatory reaction, and in another place, it might produce an anti-inflammatory action. Okay, so it has multiple effects. Redundancy means that different molecules could have the same function. In other words, two different cytokines can produce the same action in the body. If one of them fails to do it, the other one can do it. So we have redundant systems in our body as well. And sometimes nitric oxide is made the same way. We have redundant systems for making nitric oxide. It isn't all made just one way. And when tissues conditions change, like hypoxia, then nitric oxide can be produced in another way. So let's go through some citations on mouth rinses. Let's see what they say. This is not an exhaustive list, but I tried to be pretty comprehensive. And one of the people that did our study, who did go through all the literature, distilled it down to a few studies, and I'll show you that in a moment. So he did the work for me. Okay, the citations on mouth rinses. In this 2015 article from Australia, and this comes from Rachel Carver again, she had she demonstrated or showed or presented this particular study in which antibacterial mouth rinse blunts the oral nitrate reduction and increased blood pressure in treated hypertensive men and women. So this is by Bandano, and it's called the American Journal of Hypertension with this presented. And so in this study, it was done on chlorhexidine. No other mouth rinse was tested in this study. But I like this study because they did some really good things. They screened people that nobody was using a mouth rinse before they put them on this rinse. So when they screen people, you'll see that the people that were using a mouth rinse, they excluded from the study. One of the very good things that I liked about this article, because I'm going to contrast it with the one that we got from Texas and the one that everybody's quoting right now. Okay, and the conclusions from this article from Australia. The use of antibacterial mouthwash over 3 days resulted in higher systolic blood pressure by 2.3 millimeters of mercury. 95%, I think it was the 95% ANOVA scale was used to measure this significant difference, okay? The blood pressure was tested at a p-value of 0.4. That's another ANOVA value. This is a sensitivity scale that scientists use to determine whether something's significant or not. And the plasma cyclic GMP was measured, and also for a baseline. Okay. In the conclusions of this study, the interruption of the nitrate, and nitric oxide pathway through the use of antibacterial mouthwashes was paralleled by a small elevation of the systolic blood pressure treated hypertensive in hypertensive men and women, but it was not present in the diastolic blood pressure. No change in diastolic blood pressure was noted. Okay. Here's another article from Sinusology, and I think this is kind of interesting. This is where I talk to you about snoring and its effects on nitric oxide production. NO plays a role as an aerocrine messenger between the upper and lower respiratory tracts, reducing pulmonary vascular resistance and facilitating alveolar oxygen transfer into the bloodstream. Its physiological role in arterial blood oxygen could be involved in speech and singing, or be activated by physiological snoring during sleep. In other words, they're saying in this article that the vibration of your voice and humming, many people are advocating humming, will actually reduce nitric oxide from your paranasal sinuses and help you breathe it in. This vibration can be done by snoring as well. They found in this article that I think a pitch of about 130 hertz was the most optimal level for producing nitric oxide perfusion out of the nasal sinuses and breathing into your lungs. So this might be one of the reasons why meditations sometimes involve humming. Over ancient periods of time, ancient wisdom, humming may have been recognized as a way to increase our well-being and our health by releasing nitric oxide from our nose. The nose nitric oxide is continuously made in the sinuses without bacterial assistance. The cells there use the cyclic guanosine monophosphate to produce it. Cyclic guanosine monophosphate is involved in tissue production as well. Now, I want you to understand, in the nose, bacteria is not required to make nitric oxide like it is in the mouth. Key opinion leaders and people jumping on the bandwagon are saying things that aren't true. There is no bacteria production of nitric oxide in the nose, nor is there bacteria production of nitrites in the nose. Think about this. The way the mouth works is the nitrates come back to your mouth through the saliva into your mouth, and once the saliva enters your mouth with the nitrates, it's acted upon by the bacteria to produce nitrites, NO2, and then it's swallowed again. So you swallow the nitrates, and then you swallow the nitrites, and then those nitrates are converted to nitric oxide in your intestine and your stomach. If it was the same way in the nose, you'd need to be continually swallowing your nasal secretions to produce the same kind of intrasalivary production. It's just, it makes no sense. Nitric oxide is made completely by the ciliary fibers in the nose, not by bacteria, has been stated by a number of practitioners out there touting their knowledge about nitric oxide production. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this article. This is the main article that Dr. Oz used to make his quote on his show, and why everybody is saying that all mouth rinses are bad for your nitric oxide production. So let's look at this one. The frequency of tongue cleaning. This is the title of the article now. The frequency of tongue cleaning impacts the human microbiome composition and enterosalivary circulation of nitrate. All right. This comes from the Frontiers of Cellular Microbiology, and I think it's out of Houston. And by the way, look at this date, 1 March 2019. Okay. Remember that date. Okay. And also you'll see this is the number of authors. By the way, a number of things in this article were very well done. The conversion of the statistics was really remarkable. I was impressed by their evaluation of tissues and the bacteria and the different types of bacteria and what they did. Was pretty impressive. And by the way, they're making statements about this article that the authors didn't say. I want you to understand that the authors did not say that all mouth rinses interfere with nitric oxide production. All they worked with in this article was chlorhexidine. Okay. So here's but I want you to see this, and this is very, very important. I'm going to try not to mess this up in what I'm saying here. Is that this is the study parameters where they selected patients for the study. These are some of the exclusion criteria and some of the things that they let in that I don't think should have been let in. Okay. 1, the participants could be using a mouth rinse before the study. They didn't mind, they didn't care if any of the mouth rinses, the students were using a mouth rinse. All right. So one of the things that they said was some people use the mouth rinse, were included in the study, were using mouth rinses as needed. There were 5 participants in this category for 19%. There were once per day regular users of mouth rinse. There were 16 participants, or 59% in that category. There were people that were using mouth rinse twice per day. There were 6 participants for 22%. Okay. So what you have here in the people that were rinsing regularly once a day, 59%, and those who were rinsing regularly twice per day, 22%, you're already at 82%. And then there are others, 5 or 19%, that were rinsing as needed. Now, that adds up to almost 100% of the participants were using mouth rinses before they did this study. And they don't know all the things that they were using. For instance, they found that the ingredients of the mouth rinses being tested were these: essential oils like Listerine. There were 11 participants for 41%. Cetylpyridinium chloride. There were 10 participants or 37%. And finally, they had no response from 6 participants or 22%. They didn't know what mouth rinse they were using. They didn't even know what they were using. I find this is troubling to me. Okay, so there were 26 participants in the study. At the most, it could be called a pilot study. They were using 12% chlorhexidine gluconate. Actually, that was not true. They were using Paradex. Paradex contains chlorhexidine gluconate and alcohol. I would prefer they would have used chlorhexidine only, but they didn't. They instructed them to rinse with a half ounce of 30 seconds twice a day with chlorhexidine as part of their normal oral hygiene in the morning and evening. Subjects were asked to discontinue the use of any other mouth rinse for the first 7 days. So these participants that were using mouth rinses, which was practically all of them, were told to stop using their present mouth rinse and convert to chlorhexidine. This is problematic for me. Okay, I just want to explain that in a minute. No periodontal disease was to be present, so they wanted to exclude them. And then they also many did tongue cleaning, but no distinction was made between brushing the tongue or scraping the tongue. 23 cleaned daily their tongue, and 4 did so less than weekly. So most of the participants did clean their tongue, but the other 4 cleaned their tongue very sparsely, if at all. No criteria was used to screen the toothpaste. In other words, Colgate removed triclosan from their toothpaste and their mouth rinses in February 2019. Now remember, this study came out, as I showed you on the last slide, March 1, 2019. So triclosan was removed February, a month before this study was published. Triclosan was removed, and Colgate quietly put back into their toothpaste and mouth rinses stannous fluoride and took out triclosan because it was problematic and they were having a lot of trouble with its side effects. Triclosan is an antibacterial agent. We don't know if triclosan would affect nitric oxide, have no idea, but it wasn't accounted for in this study. Many of these people that were probably using the mouth rinses, maybe of those 6 that were up there, the 6 that people that they had no response for, could have been using Colgate or some other mouth rinse like Vatimacum. I don't know. This study was published in March 1, 2019. Both of these are antibacterial. The ages of the participants were 20 to over 50, and there was no screening for sleep disorders anywhere in this study. And we know that sleep disorders can affect nitric oxide production, as we were mentioned earlier in our slides. So not only is the microbiota personalized, this study states this right now, They state that the microbiota is personalized. This is from Costello, and uh, um, and also Anukum and Agbakoba, 2017. They collected oral samples from 3 randomly selected females aged 56, 28, and 28, and 8 years, extracted the DNA and amplified it on an amplifier, and then custom barcoded primers were before sequencing. And they studied the study revealed that bacteria with varying diversities colonize the subjects of females of different age groups. What they're saying here is that if you're younger, you have a different microbiota balance than you do as an aged person. So we have different microbiota. And by the way, they also found that every individual had a different microbiota. Okay. Of the 27 sites in 7 to 9 healthy adults, the microbiota on 4 occasions was different. These results indicate that our microbiota was personalized. Okay. So not only is it changed for age, but it changes from person to person. That's what they're saying here. So here's a simple question, and I'm going to go back to that Texas study. Would you not want to test patients who are not using a mouth rinse? Is this study actually showing the other antibacterial rinses have no effect on nitric oxide and blood pressure? I think that's a logical question, and I think it's saying it is. It's saying in this, if you're going to look at it, that they're ignoring the other mouth rinses and saying that they had no effect on the microbiota or the nitric oxide, but the chlorhexidine did. That's what I think I'm getting from this study. What do you think? Here's the major findings from the Texas study. No significant correlations were found for any demographic or oral hygiene data except for tongue cleaning frequency. The ANOVA range of 45 for correlation with the tongue cleaning frequency was determined to be significant with a p-value. That's another standard deviation or sensitivity value that they use in science. Subjects who cleaned their tongue twice or more per day as part of their normal oral hygiene were more likely to have an increase in systolic blood pressure during the use of chlorhexidine for 1 week. This is important. This study is talking about tongue cleaning and the use of chlorhexidine. That's all. Okay. But here's something interesting. Wait a minute. Are they still using chlorhexidine? Yes, they are. Subjects who did not clean their tongue on a daily basis were more likely to have, get this, a decrease in systolic blood pressure. You remember the people that did not clean their tongue regularly? Or who were not using a mouth rinse regularly? But actually excuse me, I'm confusing that. What I'm saying to you is there was about 4 people in this study who did not use the tongue scraper or clean their tongue regularly. Of those 4 people, those who used chlorhexidine had a decrease in the systolic blood pressure on average. The decrease. Now that's a head scratcher, okay? So the people that scraped the tongue had an increase in blood pressure. Those who did not had a decrease in blood pressure by the use of chlorhexidine. This is getting a little curious. And I'm going to ask you how they explain that. So the simple question is this. Was it the chlorhexidine or the tongue cleaning that raised the blood pressure? I mean, the chlorhexidine used alone lowered the blood pressure on those not cleaning the tongue. How did they explain that? Was the chlorhexidine or the tongue cleaning that raised the blood pressure. I mean, the chlorhexidine used alone lowered the blood pressure on those not cleaning the tongue. How did they explain that? Here's what they said. They said this: those who did not clean the tongue had more ammonia-producing bacteria and those who cleaned the tongue had more Neisseria flavescens, nitrite reductase producing bacteria, leading to actual NO production in the oral cavity. Therefore, they believe the ammonia producing nitrite reductase producing bacteria steal nitrate away from the NO pathway. Okay, let's see. That doesn't explain the reduction in blood pressure, okay? No, NO produced this way could be breathed into the lungs and have a benefit, they said. Mouth breathers would have an advantage here, I think, but they did not screen for sleep apnea. Let me just explain this, okay? What they're saying is they don't know why the chlorhexidine lowered the blood pressure on those who did not clean their tongue, okay? They don't know. They also said there was a small amount of actual nitric oxide produced in the mouth, and those are absorbed through the crypts of the tongue. It's very minor, and most of the benefit of these bacteria is the formation of nitrite, which is swallowed. So this statement about ammonia producing nitrites does not explain the reduction in blood pressure with chlorhexidine. They did not say those people who did not clean their tongue had higher blood pressures. They did say people are highly adaptable, as does Bryan and Lascaux. Here's some more findings from another study. Chlorhexidine mouthwash does not eradicate the viable bacteria on the tongue, but instead causes a transient loss of viable counts, and the recovery from chlorhexidine treatment is associated with increased bacterial metabolic activity. This is important that you hear this because this is going to be a big blow to the scorched earth evangelist. Differential abundance analysis identified significant changes in some species in response to treatment with chlorhexidine. In the zero cleaning cohort, this means the people that weren't cleaning their tongue, 3 species had significant changes in abundance, while the one cleaning cohort, in other words, they only cleaned their tongue once a day, had 10 changes in bacteria. And the 2 cleaning cohort had 12 taxonomic bacterial changes, okay? The dynamics of recovery from chlorhexidine exposure are notable in that there was a rapid recovery in viable counts between 6 to 8 hours, which corresponded with a significant increase in nitrate reduction to nitrite in the tongue samples and the richness of these bacteria flora. So are you wondering why such richness in recovery still produced higher blood pressures? And a product noted for substantivity? Me too. In other words, what they're saying in this is that rather than all the bacteria being wiped out, like the scorched earth evangelists say, is that actually the scraping of the tongue, especially 2 cleanings per day, followed by the use of chlorhexidine, actually produced an increased nitrate reduction to nitrate bacteria, and also a more richness and balanced bacteria in the tongue. These are very big blows to those who believed in scorched earth, okay? And by the way, earlier I said, I just came to my mind that I was saying that paracrine works, endocrine is working on systems far away, or and what I meant was the endocrine system did that. Paracrine works on a short distance, so I misspoke there. By the way, so here are the citations that one of the people correlated. I want to just talk to you about this a minute, because some people said there's lots and lots of studies on mouth rinses, causing problems with blood pressure and nitric oxide production. It's not true. There are very few of them, actually. Many of them are quoting each other. And so when you get it all boiled down, I'll show you what happens. They get it down to 14. So this Texas study mentioned these particular articles. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 articles. I read them all these articles that they mentioned in the Texas study. Okay. So here's the changes that I want you to note. Do changes in the oral microbiota correlate with plasma nitrite response? This is an article that asked that question, and it's a systematic review of the literature, and they did my work for me. Okay, so this was a study that helped me distill the literature out there and find out which ones were significantly talking about the actual mouth rinse effects on oral bacteria. 2 studies found no effect of mouthwashing on the changes in plasma nitrites. So nitrites, okay? And that was from Giovanni. Despite having found a marked attenuation after mouthwash, they noted that a significant rise in plasma nitrite occurred. Interestingly, this occurred despite the fact that nitrate formation of the mouth has been completely abolished by the intervention. In this study, the systematic review by this author, what they're saying is this. In their study, despite their almost complete removal of nitrate-forming bacteria in the mouth by the mouth rinse, they saw an increase of plasma nitrite, which has some of the same properties as nitric oxide. As a matter of fact, nitrites are needed to produce nitric oxide. So they're saying that somehow these nitrites increased anyway, even though the bacteria were gone. So they're saying this in this article: the nitrites can be stored in blood and tissues and used when there is a decreased endogenous production of nitric oxide. In other words, we said earlier that our bodies store nitrites for emergency use, or when one place that usually produces that product is not now functioning properly. None of these studies were long-term studies, so we only have 3 days and 2-week studies here. Okay. More from the systematic review, and this is the total of 200 records were retrieved by this systematic review. After the application of search strategy they used, after the first screening and duplicates removed, 84 records remained and were chosen for their title and abstract evaluation. And then 14 studies resulting from this step were selected for full text examination. In other words, in their review of the literature from over 200 records, they distilled it down to 14 studies. That's not a lot of studies on this. The types of mouthwashes used in the studies were different. Nevertheless, all of them contain chlorhexidine. Okay, all of them. McDonough in 2015 found that Corsadil increased blood pressure while Vademecum did not. Corsadil is a chlorhexidine mouth rinse. Okay, Vademecum is an antibacterial mouth rinse, and in this study in 2015, they found that Vademecum had no effect on blood pressure. So that's already telling you now that this study is telling you that not all antimicrobial rinses have any effect on the commensal production of nitric oxide or the blood pressure. And then Wasser in 2016 found that chlorhexidine and Cepacol raised blood pressure, but Listerine did not. As a matter of fact, in every reference that I've seen about Listerine, it has not affected blood pressure. So Listerine is off the list. I want you to get that. Listerine's off the list. Now, Listerine may have a lot of other problems. I'm just telling you about the nitric oxide and blood pressure only right now. Now let's talk about cetylpyridinium chloride rinses and the differences between mouth rinses and why we can't take one rinse study and apply it to other rinse studies. We can't do it. Here's why. In this study, Garcia, they took the cetylpyridinium chloride and they compared the bioavailability of the mouth rinse CPC with its label. And here's the label. The formulated CPC label amount shows this. In Colgate Totals, and by the way, when they switched over from triclosan to CPC, they had this. 450 is their formula label, but the bioavailability when they're testing was they only showed a 92 parts per million, okay? In the scope, they had 450 label amount, but on the bioavailability, there's only 135. And in the Colgate Total CT 750, they had a label of 750, but the bioavailability was only 278. With the Crest Pro Health, it was a big difference. They have a label amount of 700, but had a bioavailability of 630, much more bioavailable from the Crest Pro Health than from the Colgate products. Okay. And the Crest Pro Health second generation or the second PGRM, I do not know why they're different, but they had exactly the same result. What they're saying in this study is even the label will not allow you to know what is the bioavailability of cetylpyridinium chloride. By the way, cetylpyridinium chloride is a quaternary ammonium. Did you know that? It's quaternary ammonium. So I want you to understand that. So in that article, that was by Garcia. And if you look at the clinical significance, the results show that the clinical antimicrobial activity of commercial CPC mouth rinses cannot be predicted by the formulated dose or by the labeled indication alone. In these studies, mouth rinse containing high bioavailable CPC at 700 parts per million, Crest Pro Health, exhibited the strongest clinical antimicrobial activity of the tested cosmetic or commercial rinses. Okay, all right, let's go on. In a recent company online discussion, the head of a new company said they can now, I'm going to talk to you about bacterial microbiome balance now, okay? And people who think they can balance your microbiome and think they know what you should have, even though I stated earlier that depending on your age, you'll have a different microbiome balance. And from individual to individual, the microbiome balance will be different. And you know from the discussion I had about pleiotropism and redundancy, that different microbiome changes can produce the same kind of reaction. So it's very difficult to identify the right microbiome for a person. And we buy all these supplements all the time to see if we can't balance our microbiome. I'm not so sure that it's very useful. I'm not saying we shouldn't do research on that, and I think we should, but I do think that we have a problem in figuring out the individual variability between individuals. So in a recent company online discussion, the head of the new company that I was listening to on a seminar online said he had a new genetic product that could completely target P. gingivalis and eliminate P. gingivalis from our bodies completely. I was kind of shocked by this because I think P. gingivalis might have even though it is the culprit in many oral diseases and other diseases, might even be in Alzheimer's, it may have another positive role too. We know that everything has pleiotropism, and we know that bacteria can change from a kind and gentle bacteria to a virulent bacteria, depending on its environment and its influence of other bacteria around it. Okay. I had a little mini debate with this doctor. Actually, he was a company advocate. I don't know if he was a doctor at all. And I said that he's entering a brave new world of having the ability to actually determine what microbiome balance can be present, and are actually entering into a scary world, in my opinion. The microbiome has both pleiotropic and redundant aspects, as does the cytokine system. This means a plaque of a mixture of microbes, including yeast and viruses. By the way, no one's talking about yeast and viruses in these balances. And in the proportions for them may do the same thing another plaque with a different mixture and proportions might have, and it may turn virulent depending on the environment, the health of the host, the genetics of the host, and the different proportions of the mixture. I had a debate with that guy, and I'm actually more concerned about people who think they can do that than I am about, and that was the company that was advocating the elimination, complete elimination with a silver bullet of P. gingivalis. We also noted that an alternative sources of nitric oxide are at play in each individual's. All right. We further note, and this is from the Frontier study, the one from Texas, which I really agree with. We further note that not all subjects require high concentrations of nitric oxide forming nitrate reductase to achieve a healthy blood pressure. 5 subjects in quadrant 2 have a NO forming reductase 16S ratio of and a ANOVA score of 0.5, but have a resting systolic blood pressure of less than 110 milligrams. Here's what they're saying. We predict that these subjects are producing sufficient endogenous NO or have another blood pressure regulation mechanism in place that are bacterial nitric oxide independent. That's a good statement. I think it's true. We have other sources of nitric oxide that might be stronger in some individuals than others. While only an association, and this is about gum disease now, while only an association and not a cause and effect link was established, the findings suggest that about 50% of adults could have undetected high blood pressure due to gum disease as a tissue infection that can also lead to inflammation and tooth and bone loss. We know that gum disease has increased blood pressure, and we think it is a strong association, possibly cause and effect. So mouth rinses that can control gum disease might lower blood pressure in this scenario. All right. And then we're going to talk about microbial balance now with mouth rinses. And this will be a kind of a shocker. This comes from England. And what they're saying here in red, in this way, mouth rinses may have a more selective mode of action in which they mainly inhibit the growth and metabolism of organisms implicated in disease while leaving those associated with oral health relatively unaffected. And then further down, unlike the principles behind antibiotic therapy, oral care products could function prophylactically to stabilize the normal oral microbiome. And I think that's true. You saw that in the Texas study. Even with chlorhexidine, the tongue bacteria came back more rich and balanced after chlorhexidine use. And could be true of other mouth rinses as well, even those without substantivity like chlorhexidine and cetylpyridinium chloride have. There are few articles, so this is the conclusions. There are few articles on this subject. The N values, or the number of participants in these studies, is very low. Even experts have come to the conclusion, to no conclusion on the effects of disruption of microbiome on nitric oxide levels and blood pressure. Almost all articles show chlorhexidine is more problematic than other antimicrobial rinses. Other antimicrobial rinses, such as Listerine and Vatimacum, showed no effect on blood pressure. We found that in 2 of the articles. A few authors noted that the body can adapt to nitric oxide deficiencies with other alternative ways of making it, and long-term data gathering were not done in any of these studies. There were no long-term studies. We don't know if our bodies will adjust over time to a reduction in nitric oxide production in one area and make it up by another area. No study on these rinses can be applied to another rinse in these studies. They must be studied separately. Many rinses have substantivity, such as acetylpyridinium chloride and chlorhexidine. They could be quite different from effects of other rinses that do not bind to tissues. All right, and that comes from this study. Nitrite and nitric oxide production in the vasculature and in tissue systems and redundant functions is important to understand. Food sources of nitrates and nitrites are physiologic contexts for potential health benefits. That comes from that article. In closing then, in the centerpiece article from Frontier, there were no exclusions for participants already using an antimicrobial rinse before they started the study. In this article, tongue cleaning was the determining issue more than the rinse was. In this article, paradoxical results of lowered blood pressure was not adequately explained when the blood pressure was lowered by chlorhexidine. No control of antibacterial toothpaste were considered. There were no considerations as to hydrogen sulfide lowering blood pressure as was considered. And why I mention hydrogen sulfide now is this. Hydrogen sulfide is one of the bad breath gases that we know reduces blood pressure. In other studies, I can show that to you. I don't have the citation for you right now. But hydrogen sulfide is made in all the tissues of our body in small amounts. It helps lower blood pressure. Okay. It's also produced in bad breath gases. So who knows if bad breath gases may have a small effect on blood pressure? I don't know. And then I just want you to know that COVID-19 viruses enter the blood, enter the nose, and they actually grab a hold of those cilia, and they actually enter our body through the cilia in the nose. And so cleaning them with an antibacterial rinse might be a good idea. And I'm going to just show you that an antibacterial rinse like xylitol and also hypochlorous acid would be potentially good for accomplishing that. More closing facts. No one is talking about viruses in these microbial balances, okay? In this study by Dan, just say hi, Dan there, Dan Robitsky, bacteria infecting virus in the gut microbiome. And here's what they found. Some of the phages, these viruses, they're called phages, that enter and affect some of the bacteria in the gut. Actually, one type increased our ability to think, cognitive thinking, and the other type, another type of phage infecting the bacteria of the gut, actually decreased our cognitive abilities. So we know that bacteria are not the only thing we need to balance. We need to balance viruses. Are you taking any viruses in your potions that you're taking to balance your microbiome? I don't think any of you are, nor are you taking any yeast that I know of, other than some food sources for that. Okay, what people should be saying then from this discussion is this. Antimicrobial rinses can balance the oral microbiome, possibly. Good oral hygiene includes mouth rinsing and generally good hygiene practices. Mouth rinses are not all the same. There are more studies supporting their benefits than negative side effects. Periodontal disease raises blood pressure. Chlorhexidine has more negative side effects than other mouth rinses. People should not repeat inflammatory interpretation of study results without reading what they say. Scorched earth statements about mouth rinses are irresponsible and reckless. Hardly anyone is mentioning viruses, yeast, and in their global statements about oral microbiome balance. Planktonic flora and biofilm flora are different. Tongue scraping creates a planktonic-like flora that reacts differently to rinses than an undisturbed plaque on the tongue. Okay, good luck. So I hope this helps you talk more intelligently about nitric oxide and its effects on blood pressure and the nitrite producing a bacteria in the mouth. Thank you. Okay, this is Dr. Richard Downs again. I'm going to speak to you a little bit. This is a short presentation on Sleep Balance Academy. We sponsored the CE for the Las Vegas Institute Portland Protocol in Las Vegas last week. March of 2023 is this presentation. And I just wanted to introduce you to Sleep Balance Academy, where you can get an education on sleep medicine. Dr. Joseph Selk helped me develop this site, and he's an expert in sleep medicine. I developed the site as a way to bring chiropractors and dentists together to study the way of working together to produce synergistic help to patients that need this care. And also the products that you need are here. So I'm going to show this to you right now, so you know the resources of Sleep Balance Academy. It's sleepbalanceacademy.com. And again, this is me. I'm Dr. Richard Downs. I'm also the founder of OraCare, one of the co-founders of OraCare. And I also produced the company USA Guard, which is going to make the nasal rinses that are just about ready to be released for your production, for your use. I'm a retired dentist in Iowa. My former practice name was Avident.com, Avident Dental Center. And I have other websites that are used for training chiropractors and other healthcare professionals. And then Dr. Joseph Selk is my co-administrator on this site, and you can see his credentials here. He is an absolute amazing friend of dentists, and also now the chiropractors who I work with. He's been a dedicated and trusted medical advisor for our group, probably the best friend that dentist ever had. The objectives: we have new access to sleep consultations via telemedicine with our site. We can introduce the ADA policy on obstructive sleep apnea, the role of the new dental sleep medicine provider, novel home sleep testing devices, and novel oral OSA treatments. And again, here's the co-administrators of Sleep Balance Academy, but I also have now on the staff Dr. Shane Smith, who is leading up the chiropractic education division, and some great things are going to come from them. If you're a dentist and are not working with a chiropractor, I encourage you to do so. There's Dr. Joseph Selk on the upper left, Dr. Shane Smith, and myself. And this is the home page of the Sleep Balance Academy. You'll see here the CE is no longer powered by Wisdom. It's CE approved. There's a new company that's doing the CE now, called CE Approved. Wonderful company. And they are doing all of our PACE approved CE. And here, this is where you go to get the store. Further down on that page, you'll see the application to join. You can't just join, you have to consult before. I don't let everybody join this site. So you make an application to talk with me, and then we approve the joining Sleep Balance Academy. If you're already a member, then you can log in with this button. If you need to speak to Dr. Zelk or me, I'll log in on that button. Here are the resources available to the members. We have the Fast Start Snoring program. We have 40 hours of PACE-approved CE, EPAP training, which is unique to our program. SBA is the North American license holder for it's the most effective EPAP device. Dr. Joseph Zelk is very well connected with the Bongo RX company. We're also the exclusive provider for dentists for the INAP negative air sleep training device. We're the North American reseller for that product. And we're also the North American representative for Circle Ring from Body Metrics. So we have some very exclusive and very price advantageous relationships with these manufacturers. We have a very extensive DOT resource. We have an online home sleep study website for patients that is made for patients rather than doctors. We have the available online individual coaching. We have FDA-approved digital impressions and appliances. We have telemedicine for every state in the country. We have a sleep therapist for every state in the U.S. We can address TMJ, snoring, and sleep apnea and other issues. We have child and adult myofunctional therapy telemedicine for your practice, affiliate opportunities, and we offer sleep-related breathing therapies to patients, cognitive behavioral therapy by telemedicine as well. These are the certificates that people get when they go through our courses, and it is PACE approved. Here's some of the websites that belong to me. I'm also on a TV show with the Champions TV. I produce the Dr. Sleep Show, which is intended for audiences that are not professional. This is the site for the patients who want to know more about me, and it's called the Dr. Sleep Show site, along with the online home sleep study website. In here, patients can order their own sleep study. So if you live in a state where you cannot dispense a sleep study as a dentist, they can go here and the patients can buy their own from us. This is the Dental Chiropractic Collaborative, in which I train chiropractors to work with dentists and understand sleep medicine. And you can see the chiropractor forward head positioning that they work with us about, and also the TMJ issues that are often caused, and the headaches caused by obstructive sleep apnea. There's a lot of things that chiropractors can do to help us. And this is where you order the sleep studies. You go into our store, you'll see this picture of Dr. Zelk, and then it's $199 for a telemedicine. For that, you get a diagnosis, a telemedicine call from a sleep physician, might be Zelk or might be somebody else, and a prescription for care. And by the way, we've trained all our physicians to offer things like night lace and EPAP therapy and INAP and Excito-SA tongue therapies, all these things that most local physicians do not know anything about and will not prescribe for your patients. And then, of course, you'll have to remember that the American Dental Association has told us that we must screen for sleep apnea, whether you treat it or not. You must screen for it, and we recommend. We have screening forms for you to do that you can hand to your patients, and those screening forms are very easy to fill out. They have fillable PDFs for you that you can send to your patients electronically. Here's the ADA provider, the requirement. This was recommended in 2017. Once the ADA recommends something, it becomes a mandate. If you are not screening for sleep disorders in your practice, you're going to be open to liability. This is the ADA policy statement. Dentists are encouraged to screen patients for sleep-related breathing disorders. They must refer to the appropriate physician once the patient has a positive screening. You must start the screening. All patients should be updated on their health history with the screening. All these different, hypertension and diabetes mellitus should be screened for. AFib, GERD, CVAs. Those are all independent risk factors for obstructive sleep apnea measurement and also probing questions about sleep. Screen test, Epworth Sleepiness Scale, Stop Bang, all those things are available through Sleep Balance Academy. These are some of the tests that we offer. You see over here the Night Owl, the Z Machine, WatchPat, and Aries. This is a really good screening device, the Circle Plus ring. It is the only one that is racially neutral. In other words, any skin color, you can use this device and it'll give you an accurate pulse oximeter, heart rate, even a hypnogram, which is really, really nice. It's a tremendous device for also titrating your care. So you can titrate care without cost, and you continue to use it over and over again. Once you get a patient where you want them to be when you're titration, then you can do a final sleep study. But why do sleep studies in between costing you so much money when you can do it with something like this? Here's some of the studies you can get from that Circle ring. You can see we actually get an ODI. This machine takes a measurement every second as compared to an Oura ring, which is much greater distance between it. Sometimes by the time it takes a reading, it'll miss an event. So you don't want to use an Oura ring for this treatment or this screening. You can see the ODI score, you get a T90 score, the heart rate, and the hypnogram. You can even do an electrocardiogram and the blood pressure. Okay. We have different types of nasal aids, dilators, and also EPAP devices. And the Excito-SA, which stimulates a myofunctional treatment of the tongue. It's been proven to work. It's FDA approved for mild sleep apnea. The INAP, which is a negative pressure device, you can order through our site. Night lace is one of the things we teach. And how it's used is very, very important for some patients for sleep apnea control and snoring control. So the steps to using, this is the main screen I want you to see. Steps for using the SBA. Screen with an SBA paper screening form, or use the HST screening form order form here. It's a fillable PDF. The Dr. Sleep fillable PDF is you can get on at the Dr. Sleep website. Screen with the Circle Plus. I would screen with the Circle Plus along with your screening form. If you have a person that's questionable, just send them out with the Circle Plus, get some readings, let that help you decide whether they need to have a sleep test or not. You can also titrate with the Circle Plus. Then you issue a home sleep study and purchase an interp only. Here's an important thing you need to know. When you do a home sleep study, if you dispense it from the office or you order it, doesn't matter. You always have to have an interpretation. You cannot do a sleep study, look at it and say, oh, all these reasons are all really good. I'm just going to stick that in their record. You have to get it interpreted by a sleep doctor and then that put in your record. You're not allowed to look at that and ignore getting an official interpretation and put it in the record. It puts you into liability. If the data looks normal or near normal, you have an interp only. Just order the interp. We have that as an option on our site. If the data looks abnormal or near abnormal, order a full telemedicine. You'll get an interpretation, a diagnosis, a letter of medical necessity, and a prescription. Or get the prescription to do a study. If you live in a state where you can't do that without a prescription, get the RX to do the study with the HST order form that we have for you, and then issue the HST and then submit for the prescription. Now, once you get, if you get a telemedicine call from Dr. Singh or Dr. Zelk, and it's to get a HST prescription, so you can actually do the HST, all right? And then you do the HST and you send that to the doctor. They don't have to do necessarily another telemedicine with your patient. They've got one in the records. So they'll just see the sleep study. They'll bring up their notes from their first consultation they did for you, and then they'll go ahead and issue the LMN and the RX. That makes sense? Okay. At the end of a moderate to severe treatment, you should purchase another follow-up telemed to reevaluate the validity of your results. And that Dr. Zelk or Dr. Singh or whoever else might send you in a different direction. They may add a treatment to what you're doing, okay? But in moderate to severe cases, it is good for you to do a reevaluation after you've titrated and you got what you think is good, and you've got a good HST. It would be good to get an evaluation. And there's a lower cost reevaluation purchase button on our site, okay? Very important. All HSTs require an MD interpretation. I just told you that. And the last one is all treatment done that is not a CPAP requires you to have a CPAP intolerance form in the record. If you treat a patient with an oral sleep appliance or an INAP or a Bongo RX or an Excito SA or any other kind of treatment or combination thereof, but it's not a CPAP, you must have a record of a CPAP intolerance form in your record, just to protect you legally. All right, that's it. If you have any questions about Sleep Balance Academy, go to the site, sleepbalanceacademy.com, and message me or email me from that site, and I'll be glad to help you. Thank you very much. By the way, my email is rdownsdds@gmail.com.